In the quiet town of Gray Hollow, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, life had always followed a predictable rhythm. The leaves turned gold in autumn, snow blanketed the ground each winter, and the sun returned in spring, bringing life back to the earth. But as the fall of 2023 approached, the air was thick with a tension that seemed to curl the edges of reality itself. News reports had been unusually bleak, filled with warnings about climate change and extreme weather. What was once a background hum in the lives of Gray Hollow's residents morphed into a siren call. Rumors swirled, some whispered of a government conspiracy, others spoke of environmental scientists crying out in desperation. But it was in a cramped diner, the local haunt where everyone gathered to share stories and eat pie, that the first chilling details began to unfold. "Did you hear what happened to that glacier up north?" Clara, the diner's owner, asked while wiping down the counter. Her eyes darted toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in with a revelation. "They say it's melting faster than anyone thought." Jack, a grizzled local with a penchant for conspiracy theories, leaned in. "That's just the tip of the iceberg, Clara. I heard from a buddy at the Weather Bureau that the whole climate system is about to flip. They're saying we could be facing another ice age, like, real soon." The others around the table, a mix of farmers, teachers, and tradespeople, exchanged uneasy glances. The laughter that usually filled the diner died down, replaced by a palpable fear. What would an ice age mean for them? Would they be able to survive? Days passed, and as October wore on, the chatter grew more frantic. The government had issued vague warnings about impending weather patterns, but few took them seriously. That is until the snow began to fall early, blanketing the town in an unusual white layer that clung stubbornly to the ground. It was thick and heavy, more reminiscent of late December than mid-October. People began to panic. The news channels spun tales of disaster, showing images of ice caps cracking and flooding in coastal cities, but they were merely shadows of the truth. Meanwhile, the government remained silent, cloaked in secrecy, their lips tightly sealed. Citizens felt the weight of their neglect, and whispers of dissent grew louder. "They're hiding something," a woman said during an emergency town meeting. "They know more than they're telling us." As the temperature began to plummet, the first signs of chaos appeared. Food supplies dwindled. Local stores ran out of essentials as panic buying gripped the town. Families prepared for the worst, stockpiling cans of beans, bottled water, and firewood. But deep down, they all sensed that their small town worries were just a facade for something much greater. It was on the 15th of October, just 2 weeks after the first snowfall, that the first reports of strange weather patterns began circulating. Rain began to fall, but it was unlike any rain they had seen before. It was icy, stinging against the skin as if tiny needles were raining down. It pooled on the ground, freezing almost instantly. Roads became slick, treacherous, and impassable. That night, Gray Hollow was enveloped in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crack of ice splitting apart. The following day brought more rain and colder temperatures. The townsfolk huddled in their homes, listening to the news on the radio, which had grown increasingly desperate. "Stay indoors," the announcer warned, his voice trembling slightly. "Avoid unnecessary travel." But the real terror lay not in the cold or the rain. As the days passed, the residents of Gray Hollow began to notice that their water supply was tainted. What had once been a crisp, clear stream flowing from the mountains turned murky, choked with debris and ice. Panic set in as the townspeople tried to fill their bathtubs and buckets, but their efforts were in vain. Soon, the water became unfit for drinking, and the once friendly community turned tense. People began to fight over resources. A group of locals clashed in the street over a few crates of bottled water at the local convenience store. Screams filled the air, echoing off the frozen buildings, a haunting reminder of the desperation clawing at the edges of their humanity. Clara's diner became a refuge for the injured, a place where people sought shelter from the storm outside. She offered whatever she could. Warm soup, a listening ear, but even her hospitality couldn't quell the rising tide of fear. The next significant snowfall came just days later, and with it, an overwhelming sense of doom settled over Gray Hollow. The storm lasted 3 days, blanketing the town under several feet of snow. Power lines snapped, plunging the town into darkness. The frigid temperatures brought an unyielding chill, turning the once vibrant community into a desolate landscape. As the power went out, the first signs of rebellion emerged. Jack, emboldened by fear and frustration, called a meeting at the town hall. The townsfolk gathered, their faces gaunt and hollow from fear. Jack stood at the front, eyes wild with a mixture of determination and madness. "They're hiding the truth from us," he shouted, voice echoing against the cold walls. "This is more than just bad weather. We need to prepare for what's coming." The room erupted in chaos. Some agreed, whispering of gathering supplies and forming a coalition to survive the impending doom. Others rolled their eyes, too wrapped up in their despair to consider action. "What do we do, Jack?" a voice finally shouted from the back of the room. "What's the plan?" As he paced back and forth, Jack outlined a strategy. "We can't rely on the government. We need to band together, fortify our homes, and gather resources. We can survive this if we're smart about it." As people began to voice their ideas, a sense of unity started to form amidst the chaos. They discussed pooling their supplies, setting up watch groups, and looking out for one another. But as the meeting adjourned, a shadow of doubt loomed over them. What if their efforts were futile? What if the freeze was unstoppable? The next morning, they awoke to an even grimmer reality. The snow continued to pile higher, but now a thick layer of ice encased everything. Trees bent under the weight, snapping like twigs. The townspeople woke to the sound of breaking glass as the windows of homes and businesses shattered under the pressure. It felt as if the earth itself was protesting, quaking beneath the layers of ice and snow. The days turned into a blur of survival. As the ice enveloped Gray Hollow, the community felt like a trapped animal, each member struggling to find a way out. Supplies ran low, and the townsfolk were forced to venture out into the increasingly hostile environment, braving the biting wind and the constant threat of falling debris. The air was thick with the scent of fear, mingling with the smell of frozen earth. By the end of October, as Halloween approached, the situation escalated. The once bustling streets of Gray Hollow now lay buried under a thick layer of snow, making even the simplest tasks arduous. The temperature plummeted to record lows, and the news from the outside world became even more concerning. Those few who managed to tune into radio broadcasts heard tales of cities succumbing to the cold, citizens fighting over dwindling resources, and an official government announcement warning of an impending national crisis. The townspeople began to sense the weight of the government's silence. Why had they not come to help? Why were they not informing the public of the real danger? Conspiracy theories ran rampant. Some claimed that the government had known about the impending ice age for years, withholding the truth to prevent mass panic. Others believed it was a ploy to control the population, forcing people into a state of dependency. Tensions rose within the community as fear morphed into paranoia. On Halloween night, as families huddled in their homes, a storm unlike any other hit Gray Hollow. It started as a soft whisper of wind but soon escalated into a howling gale. Ice pelted the town, a frigid rain that froze as it hit, creating a cacophony of sound that resembled shattering glass. The power lines were already down, and darkness settled over the town like a heavy blanket, smothering any flicker of hope. Children who once gleefully anticipated trick-or-treating now sat frightened in their homes, clutching flashlights and blankets. The comforting sound of laughter was replaced by muffled cries and the shuffling of feet. In Clara's diner, the warmth of the stove was a sanctuary, but even here, despair seeped in. The few patrons gathered for one last meal before the storm hit. "What do we do if this keeps up?" one man asked, fear etched into his face. "We prepare," Clara replied, her voice firm yet trembling. "We keep the fire going, and we stick together. We can't let this ice age swallow us whole." As the storm raged outside, the townsfolk listened to the eerie howls of the wind, punctuated by the occasional crash of falling trees. Hours turned into an eternity, and the haunting reality set in. They were no longer safe, even within their own homes. The following morning, a deafening silence hung over Gray Hollow. When they finally mustered the courage to step outside, the sight was both awe-inspiring and horrifying. The entire town was encased in a thick layer of ice, shimmering like glass. Cars were frozen in place, and trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches heavy with frost. But the beauty of the ice quickly faded as the reality of their situation sank in. The roads were impassable, the food supplies were critically low, and panic began to set in among the townsfolk. Families who had once been close-knit were now suspicious of one another, guarding their supplies with a ferocity that was both shocking and unsettling. Jack, determined to rally the community, called for another meeting at the town hall. The tension was palpable as he stood before the gathered townsfolk. "We need to form teams," he urged, his voice strong against the backdrop of despair. "We can't just sit here and wait to freeze to death. We need to find food and water. We need to work together." Reluctantly, people began to nod, and small groups formed, each tasked with different goals, searching for food, attempting to repair the broken water lines, and fortifying their homes against the relentless cold. But as the days turned into weeks, the strain began to show. A group that set out to scavenge food returned with nothing but despair. They had braved the icy streets only to find that every store had been stripped bare. Desperation turned to anger as they returned to the town hall, demanding answers from Jack. "We can't survive like this," a woman shouted, her voice cracking. "We need real solutions." "I know it's hard," Jack replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "But we can't give up. We have to keep looking, keep trying." As tensions flared, factions began to form. Some people advocated for raiding neighboring towns for supplies, while others argued for a more cautious approach. Each argument stoked the flames of division, tearing at the fragile threads of community that had once held them together. Amidst the chaos, Clara sought solace in her diner. Each morning, she opened the doors, offering warm soup and a place to gather, even if only for a brief moment. She was determined to keep the spirit of the town alive, but with every passing day, it grew more difficult. The laughter of children faded, replaced by the hollow echoes of despair. As November rolled in, the chill deepened, and hope began to dwindle. The residents of Gray Hollow huddled in their homes, surviving on dwindling supplies and the meager warmth of wood stoves. Outside, the landscape remained a frozen wasteland, devoid of life. Then, one day, Clara received a message that would shatter the fragile remnants of their sanity. A stranger arrived at her diner, a man wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, his breath visible in the freezing air. "I come from Cedar Falls," he gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "You need to evacuate. It's worse there. They're fighting. They're killing each other for food. It's chaos." The townspeople gathered around, their hearts racing. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What do you mean?" she asked, the words barely escaping her lips. "The government. They've abandoned us. They're hiding the truth about the Ice Age. It's not going to end. It's just going to get worse." As the man's story unfolded, the grim reality they had all feared settled in. The news of violence, chaos, and desperation began to spread like wildfire. They were not just facing an ice age, they were on the brink of societal collapse. Panic surged through the diner. People began to whisper, their voices filled with uncertainty and dread. "What do we do?" someone asked, their voice quaking. The atmosphere in Clara's diner shifted as the stranger's words echoed in the minds of the townsfolk. The once cozy refuge now felt like a prison, its walls closing in as the weight of impending doom pressed down upon them. Fear clung to the air, thick and suffocating. "We can't stay here," a voice called from the back. "We need to leave, to find somewhere safe." The idea hung in the air, a fragile hope in the face of overwhelming despair. But where could they go? Outside, the world was a frozen labyrinth, each turn fraught with danger. Roads lay buried beneath mountains of snow and ice, making escape seem like an impossible dream. "We need to fortify our homes first," Jack insisted, trying to maintain a sense of order amidst the chaos. "We can't just abandon everything we've built here. We fight for our town." As he spoke, Clara felt a surge of determination. She knew the townsfolk needed a leader, someone to rally them against the encroaching freeze. "Jack's right," she said, her voice rising above the murmurs. "We need to protect what we have and prepare for what's coming. We'll have to work together, but we can't lose hope." People nodded slowly, yet the specter of desperation loomed large. In the following days, the town's atmosphere grew increasingly fraught. Each person became a ghost of their former self, haunted by the grim prospect of survival. The gathering place that had once been a hub of warmth and laughter now felt like a breeding ground for fear and suspicion. As the cold pressed in, the townsfolk fortified their homes. They barricaded doors and windows, pooling their resources in a desperate bid to weather the storm. Clara organized groups to patrol the area, seeking out any remaining supplies. Each expedition became a calculated risk, with lives hanging in the balance. But as November wore on, the camaraderie began to fray. The strain of survival weighed heavily on everyone. Tensions flared during supply runs, voices raised over the smallest grievances. Food became a bargaining chip, and trust eroded as people turned against one another. The weather mirrored their unrest. One morning, the skies darkened ominously and a tempest swept through Grey Hollow, bringing with it an ice storm that felt almost alive. The sound of cracking branches echoed like gunshots, and residents huddled together in terror. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find their town transformed into a landscape of twisted, frozen remains. In the days that followed, a grim reality took hold. The food supplies dwindled to near nothingness, and the whispers of dissent turned to open hostility. Families turned against one another, and the notion of community splintered under the weight of survival instincts. Clara watched helplessly as people she had known for years began to break down, their faces twisted with fear and desperation. One evening, as she prepared soup for the remaining patrons, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts filled the air, a chorus of fear and anger. Clara rushed to the window, heart racing. A group of men, faces grim and eyes wild, had formed a circle around a figure on the ground, a stranger who had wandered into their midst, seeking shelter and warmth. "What do we do with him?" one man shouted, brandishing a makeshift weapon. "He could be a thief. He could bring the chaos to us." Clara felt her stomach drop. The stranger lay shivering in the snow, clearly in need of help. "Wait," she called out, throwing open the door. "He's just a man. We can't turn him away." But her words fell on deaf ears. The group turned, their expressions twisted with fear. "You don't understand," another man spat. "This is survival now. There's no room for compassion." The stranger looked up, eyes wide with terror. "Please, I mean no harm," he pleaded, but his words only fueled the mob's fury. Clara stepped forward, heart pounding. "If we don't help each other, we're all going to die." For a moment, silence fell over the gathering, and Clara hoped reason would prevail. But the mob surged forward, panic overtaking their reason. The stranger scrambled to his feet, but before he could run, the group descended upon him, shoving him to the ground, their cries echoing like a war drum. In that moment, Clara realized the chilling truth. Survival had driven them to madness. The very essence of humanity was crumbling under the relentless pressure of fear and desperation. "Stop!" Clara screamed, stepping into the fray, her heart racing as she fought against the tide of aggression. But her voice was lost amidst the chaos. She felt helpless as she watched the violence unfold before her heart breaking for the stranger who had come seeking sanctuary. As the brutal confrontation raged on, Clara's mind raced. She knew this was only the beginning. If they didn't find a way to unite, to reclaim their humanity, they would descend into darkness. They would become nothing more than animals, fighting over scraps. Eventually, the mob grew tired, their anger waning. The stranger lay on the ground, battered and beaten. Clara rushed to him, helping him to his feet, her heart heavy with sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered, feeling the weight of their actions. The man looked at her, eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and despair. "I just wanted to find safety." "We need to help each other," Clara insisted, turning back to the group, her voice stronger now. "This isn't just about survival, it's about who we are. We need to remember that." The crowd shifted, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Clara's plea hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope. "We can't let this ice age freeze our hearts as well. We need to come together or risk losing everything, our lives, our humanity." The words struck a chord and the group began to murmur among themselves. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. They stood on the precipice of something vital. Whether it would lead to redemption or ruin remained uncertain. As the frostbitten days passed, the tension slowly dissipated, and the townsfolk began to find common ground once more. They banded together, creating a makeshift council to make decisions for the community. The stranger, whose name was Caleb, became a symbol of their renewed commitment to survival, an emblem of what could happen when fear reigned unchecked. Despite the biting cold, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. They fortified their homes further, pooled their resources, and even began to strategize on how to scavenge for food. The sense of unity slowly returned, and while the ice still clung to their lives, they began to fight back, not just against the elements, but against the darkness that threatened to overtake them. The days turned into weeks, and the relentless grip of winter tightened around Grey Hollow. The ice age that loomed above them became an ever-present specter, but amidst the frost and despair, something remarkable began to happen. The townsfolk, once divided by fear, began to find strength in their unity. Caleb, the stranger Clara had saved, quickly became an integral part of the community. His knowledge of survival tactics and resourcefulness inspired others to take action. Under his guidance, they organized scavenging parties to venture beyond their frozen enclave, scouring the outskirts for food and supplies. They faced dangers that came not just from the elements, but from the shadows of desperation that hung over them. Clara opened the diner each day, turning it into a hub of activity. Locals brought back whatever they could find: canned goods, stale bread, even old hunting supplies. As people shared stories around the stove, the warmth of community slowly crept back into their hearts. It was a delicate balance, but it kept them grounded amidst the chaos. Yet, even as they fortified their bonds, the harsh reality of their situation became undeniable. Food remained scarce, and with each passing day, the fight for survival intensified. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. One frigid morning, Clara gathered everyone at the diner to discuss their next steps. The room was filled with familiar faces, but weariness hung heavily in the air. "We need a plan," she began, her voice steady. "We can't continue like this. We're running out of time, and winter hasn't even reached its peak." Caleb stepped forward, his brow furrowed with thought. "We've scoured most of the immediate area, but there's a hunting lodge a few miles up the mountain. If we can reach it, there might be supplies. We could find food or gear that we desperately need." Excitement rippled through the crowd, mingled with trepidation. "But it's dangerous," someone interjected. "The path is treacherous, and we've lost people already." "We need to take risks," Caleb replied firmly. "Staying here will only lead to our demise. If we work together, we can make it. We have to believe in each other." Clara felt the weight of the decision settling over her. "If we do this, we go as a group. We leave no one behind. We can't afford to lose anyone else." The townsfolk murmured in agreement, a flicker of determination igniting in their eyes. They began to prepare for the journey, gathering supplies and fortifying their clothing against the unforgiving cold. As the day of the expedition approached, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at her gut. It felt like they were stepping into the maw of a great beast, and the icy winds whispered warnings of what lay ahead. But there was no turning back now. They had to believe in their strength. The morning dawned cold and gray, the world outside a frozen expanse. The group gathered at the diner, clad in layers of clothing, each person clutching makeshift weapons, shovels, axes, anything that could serve as a defense. Clara led the way, her heart pounding as they set out into the bleak wilderness. The trail to the hunting lodge wound through the dense trees, their branches heavy with frost. The further they traveled, the more the landscape changed. The once familiar paths now looked alien, transformed into a white wilderness that seemed to swallow them whole. The cold bit at their skin, and the silence was punctuated only by the crunch of snow beneath their feet. As they trudged along, Clara took note of the group's dynamic. They moved together, but tension simmered beneath the surface. Whispers of doubt crept into conversations, and glances exchanged spoke of unspoken fears. Each step felt like a journey deeper into the unknown. Hours passed, and exhaustion set in. They reached a clearing, where the remnants of the hunting lodge loomed in the distance, half hidden by trees. Clara felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of foreboding. Something felt off. As they approached the lodge, the air grew still. A heavy silence enveloped them, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the frozen ground. The door creaked open, revealing a dark interior shrouded in dust and cobwebs. The once vibrant gathering place for hunters now lay dormant, swallowed by time and neglect. Clara stepped inside first, her breath visible in the frigid air. The scent of mold mingled with decay, and she shivered as the darkness enveloped her. The others followed cautiously, eyes darting around the room. "Stay alert," Caleb warned, scanning the shadows. As they explored the lodge, they stumbled upon a small pantry tucked away in a corner. Clara's heart raced as they pried it open, revealing a trove of canned goods, jars of preserves, and bags of rice. "This is it," someone exclaimed, a glimmer of hope igniting in the group. But just as they began to celebrate their fortune, a loud crash echoed from outside. The group froze, instincts kicking in. Clara exchanged worried glances with Caleb before they rushed to the door, weapons at the ready. Outside, a blizzard raged, snow swirling in violent gusts, and then they saw it. A figure stumbling through the storm, arms raised in surrender. It was a woman, her clothing tattered and frozen, face pale as she fought against the wind. "Help," she cried, voice barely audible over the howl of the storm. "Please." Clara's heart raced with conflicting emotions. They had to decide, risk exposing themselves further or take in a potential threat. But as the woman collapsed at their feet, Clara felt her resolve strengthen. "We can't leave her," she shouted over the storm. Caleb nodded, and they rushed forward, dragging the woman inside before the storm swallowed them whole. Clara felt the weight of their decision settle in. They would have to make room for one more. As they gathered around the woman, Clara began to assess her injuries. She was frostbitten, barely conscious, and it became evident that she needed medical attention. The group rallied together, sharing blankets and supplies, their compassion overriding their fears. "Who are you?" Clara asked gently, kneeling beside the woman. "Maria," she murmured, her voice weak. "I was with a group. We got separated. The cold. It's relentless." As Maria recounted her harrowing tale of survival, Clara felt a mix of sympathy and fear. The cold had shattered her group, and they had turned on one another, succumbing to the madness that had gripped Grey Hollow. "I thought I could find safety," Maria whispered, her eyes glazing over with pain. But as she spoke, Clara saw a flicker of determination in the woman's gaze. "We can't let this freeze take us," she said with a sudden intensity. "We have to fight, together." Those words hung in the air like a lifeline, and Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were not alone. They were a community, bound by survival and the will to resist the darkness. The storm outside raged on, but inside the lodge, they began to strategize. With Maria's knowledge of the surrounding area and Caleb's resourcefulness, they crafted a plan to gather supplies and scout the vicinity. They would not let fear dictate their fate. Days passed, and the group settled into a routine within the lodge. They ventured out during brief breaks in the storm, gathering supplies from the pantry, fortifying the building, and maintaining a watchful eye for any threats. Each day was a battle, but they fought together, determined to hold on to their humanity. But as the winter deepened, new challenges emerged. The Ice Age showed no signs of relenting, and the blizzards intensified. The cold seeped into their bones and supplies began to dwindle once more. The shadows of desperation began to loom larger, whispering promises of chaos. Clara gathered the group one night, huddled around the warmth of the fire. "We need to discuss what's next," she said, her voice steady but laced with worry. "If this continues, we won't survive much longer." Caleb nodded, his expression grave. "We need to find other survivors, establish contact with nearby towns. There may be others out there who need help. Who can help us?" But Maria's face darkened, a flicker of fear crossing her features. "What if we find chaos instead? What if they're like those we lost?" The tension in the room thickened as they grappled with the prospect of leaving their temporary refuge. But Clara's heart swelled with determination. "We have to take the risk. We can't let fear control us. We owe it to ourselves to try." As they prepared for the next leg of their journey, Clara felt the weight of leadership resting heavily on her shoulders. They had survived the first wave of the Ice Age, but the true battle was just beginning. The storm outside continued to howl, its icy breath clawing at the walls of the hunting lodge. Clara felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her as she gathered the group for a final meeting before their next expedition. The flickering fire cast eerie shadows on the walls, mirroring the fears that swirled in the minds of her companions. "We've survived this long by sticking together," Clara began, her voice steady. "But if we want to find help, we need to leave this lodge. We can't stay here forever." Caleb nodded, his expression grave. "The storms have made it clear that we can't rely on luck. We need to take action before we run out of resources entirely. There may be other survivors who have found ways to adapt." Maria, sitting close to the fire, glanced out the window where snowflakes danced in the wind. "But if we leave, what if we don't find anyone? What if we get lost in the wilderness?" Clara felt the tension rising. "I understand your fears, but we're stronger together. We have to believe that there's hope out there. We can't let fear dictate our lives." After a tense silence, the group began to murmur in agreement. There was a sense of resolve, a flicker of hope igniting within them. They prepared for their departure, gathering supplies and checking their makeshift weapons. Clara could feel the pulse of determination thrumming in the air. As dawn broke, the group set out into the frigid morning light, the sun barely breaking through the thick clouds. Each step felt like a pact, a commitment to fight against the ice age that threatened to consume them. The world around them was silent, a haunting beauty cloaked in frost, and Clara felt a surge of resilience within her. They followed a path that led through the dense trees, their breaths visible in the cold air. The crunch of snow beneath their boots echoed in the stillness, a reminder of the fragile line they walked between life and death. Hours passed, and just as Clara began to feel the weight of uncertainty creep back in, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the distance, a small cabin appeared, smoke curling from its chimney. It was a beacon of warmth in the icy landscape, and Clara's heart raced with anticipation. As they approached the cabin, Clara felt a mix of hope and trepidation. "Stay alert," she cautioned, gripping her makeshift weapon tightly. They knocked on the door, hearts pounding as they waited for a response. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing an older man with a weathered face and weary eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, suspicion lacing his voice. "We're survivors from Grey Hollow," Clara explained, her voice steady. "We're looking for help, food, anything we can find. We heard there might be others here." The man's expression softened slightly, but doubt still lingered. "You're not the first group to come here. Many have turned to violence, fighting for what little we have left." Clara felt her heart sink. "We're not like that. We're just trying to survive. We can work together." He hesitated, glancing back into the cabin as if weighing his options. Finally, he stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. "Fine, but if you cause trouble, you'll regret it." As they stepped into the cabin, Clara was greeted by the warmth of a fire crackling in the hearth. A woman stood in the kitchen, her hands busy preparing a simple meal. The scent of stew filled the air, and Clara felt a pang of longing for the comforts of home. "Welcome," the woman said, a cautious smile breaking through the tension. "I'm Evelyn. We don't have much, but you're welcome to share what we have." Gratitude flooded Clara's heart as they settled in, sharing their stories of survival and the horrors they had faced. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could breathe without the weight of despair pressing down on them. But even in the warmth of the cabin, Clara could sense an underlying tension. The couple exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting an unspoken fear. As the evening wore on, Clara gathered the group around the fire to discuss their next steps. "We need to strategize," Clara said, her voice firm. "There may be more survivors out there. We should consider reaching out to other communities, see if we can build alliances." Caleb nodded in agreement. "But we need to be cautious. If there are groups out there willing to fight, we can't put ourselves in danger." The older man, whose name was Marcus, listened intently. "You're right to be careful. There's been a lot of violence since the Ice Age began. People have turned on each other in their desperation." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. "But we can't let fear control us. We need to connect, to help one another." Evelyn chimed in, her voice soft but steady. "We've lost too many people already. If we want to survive, we need to be smart about it. We can't afford to let ourselves be driven by fear." As they sat around the fire, Clara felt a sense of solidarity beginning to grow. Despite the shadows that loomed outside, the warmth of human connection flickered like the flames before them. They began to forge plans to scout the area, reach out to other survivors, and build a network of hope. But as the night wore on, the reality of their situation settled heavily in the air. The Ice Age was far from over, and with each passing day, the struggle for survival would only intensify. They were faced with an uncertain future, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were just beginning to scratch the surface of the chaos that lay ahead. The cabin settled into a rhythm over the next few days, the warmth of the fire a constant reminder of the fragile safety they had found. Clara and her group worked alongside Marcus and Evelyn, blending their resources and efforts in a bid to weather the unrelenting ice age that gripped the land. But even as they settled in, Clara felt the tension building once more. Each day they ventured out to scavenge the surrounding area, searching for supplies and gathering information about nearby communities. But every time they encountered a new group, the same questions loomed. Could they be trusted? Would they turn to violence? One cold morning, Clara and Caleb set out to scout a nearby farmstead that Marcus had mentioned. As they approached, the bleakness of the landscape weighed heavily on them. The farm was surrounded by a dilapidated fence, the barn sagging under the weight of snow. Clara felt a surge of hope. Perhaps they would find food or supplies that could sustain their group. As they crept closer, Clara spotted movement near the barn. A figure emerged, bundled in layers of clothing. Clara's heart raced. Was this a friend or foe? "Hello," she called, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. The figure froze, then slowly approached, revealing a gaunt face etched with weariness. It was a woman, her eyes filled with suspicion. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice wary. "We're looking for supplies," Clara replied, her tone calm. "We're from Grey Hollow. We're trying to survive." The woman hesitated, glancing back toward the barn. "You're not the first group to come here. Others have tried to take what little we have left." Caleb stepped forward, his expression earnest. "We don't want to take anything from you. We're hoping to share resources, to work together. We can help each other." The woman's gaze softened slightly, but doubt still lingered in her eyes. "You don't understand. People are desperate. They'll do anything to survive." "Then let us help you," Clara implored. "We can be stronger together." After a tense moment, the woman nodded, leading them toward the barn. Inside, Clara's heart sank at the sight before her. The shelves were nearly bare, with only a few cans of food and a couple of sacks of grain left. "We're running low," the woman admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how much longer we can last." Caleb's brow furrowed in thought. "We need to find other communities. We have to spread the word that there's safety in numbers." The woman's name was Sarah, and she agreed to join them, understanding that their best chance for survival lay in unity. Together, they left the farmstead, each step echoing the weight of their decision. As they traveled back to the cabin, Clara felt a glimmer of hope for the future. But that night, as they sat around the fire, Clara sensed that darkness was gathering. The winds outside howled like a pack of wolves, and the shadows in the cabin seemed to grow longer, more oppressive. "We need to discuss our next steps," Clara said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her heart. "We can't afford to wait any longer. We need to reach out to other survivors, to find others like us." Marcus shifted uneasily. "And what if we find more violence? What if they're not willing to share?" "We can't let fear dictate our actions," Clara replied firmly. "We need to take the risk. We've lost too many already." Evelyn nodded in agreement. "We have to find a way to connect with other groups. There's strength in numbers, and we can't afford to isolate ourselves." Caleb chimed in. "I've seen how quickly desperation can turn to chaos. We need to approach others with caution, but we can't shy away from making connections." As the group debated their plan, Clara felt the weight of leadership settle upon her once more. They were on the brink of a decision that could either save them or plunge them further into darkness. The following morning, Clara and her group set out once more, this time with Sarah at their side. They traversed the landscape, their breath visible in the frigid air, eyes scanning for signs of life. After hours of searching, they spotted a faint trail leading to a cluster of cabins nestled in the trees. Clara's heart raced. This could be another chance at survival. As they approached, Clara raised her hand to signal for caution. They crept closer, listening intently for any sounds of life. But the area was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. Just as they were about to retreat, a figure emerged from the nearest cabin, a young man with a rugged appearance and wary eyes. "Who's there?" he called, voice echoing in the stillness. "We're survivors," Clara replied, her tone calm. "We're looking for others like us. Can we talk?" The young man regarded them warily, then motioned for them to come closer. "Fine, but keep your hands where I can see them." As they entered the clearing, Clara could see other figures watching from the shadows, their faces etched with suspicion. "What do you want?" the young man asked again, his tone demanding. "We're hoping to connect with other survivors," Clara explained, her voice steady. "We want to work together to share resources and build a community. We can't survive this alone." The young man exchanged glances with the others and Clara could feel the tension in the air. "We've seen too much violence. People will do anything to survive." "We're not here to fight," Caleb said, stepping forward. "We want to help, to share what we have." After a long pause, the young man sighed, a mixture of fear and frustration evident in his eyes. "Fine, come inside, but know that if you try anything, you'll regret it." As they entered the cabin, Clara felt a flicker of hope. They were taking steps toward connection, and with each encounter they were forging a path through the darkness. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, and Clara could see that the group was on edge. But as they shared their stories, Clara felt the walls begin to lower, if only slightly. The young man introduced himself as Jake, and the others began to open up about their struggles. The more they talked, the more Clara sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Jake seemed to relax, his posture easing as he realized that they were all in this together. But just as Clara began to feel a sense of camaraderie, a loud crash echoed from outside. Panic surged through the group and Clara's heart raced. They rushed to the window to see a group of strangers approaching, their faces obscured by the snow. Clara's mind raced. Who were they, friends or foes? "Get ready," Jake shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to defend our home."